Recently I read about a man driving home one night. It was pouring rain, perhaps the hardest rain he'd ever seen, thunder, lightning, the proverbial cats and dogs, about an inch an hour. And he saw a young woman dressed in white walking along the road, so he was concerned for her well-being, so he stopped and offered her a ride, which she accepted. And he happened to notice that she didn't have a jacket on, so he gave her his. Despite his efforts to engage her in conversation, well, she didn't talk much, only to tell him how to get to her house. So they got to her house and said goodnight and waited until she went inside, belatedly realizing that he had let her walk off with his jacket, so he noted the address, intending to return the next day. And so when he returned, another woman answered the door, perhaps her mother, and he explained to her what had happened the night before. And the woman hollered at him, "What are you talking about? Is this some kind of sick joke?" And the man told her, "Well, no, I picked up a young woman last night during the storm and dropped her off here at this house. I even gave her my jacket." The woman screamed, "Get out of here! Why are you doing this to me? The woman you described sounds just like my daughter who died a month ago. If you don't believe me, go to her grave." And so she angrily told him where the grave was. So puzzled, he went to the grave there to see for himself. And there, neatly folded on her grave, was the man's jacket. It has been a while for most of us, but you remember the first time someone jumped out from behind the door and said, "Boo." I was tempted to do that this morning, just kind of squat down and suddenly jump up. Scared you, didn't it? Immediately your body was jolted with adrenaline and you began to shake. Now I don't know if there's such a thing as a startle reflex, but it's hard to explain our reaction to the surprise of someone unexpectedly jumping out at us. We are frightened, but of what? A ghost? Well, the gospel reading from Luke this morning is very much like the gospel reading we heard from John last Sunday. And in both we heard Jesus himself suddenly stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified, and they thought they were seeing a ghost. And though Jesus had said, "Peace be with you," he might just as well have popped into the room and said, "Boo." Effectively, that is probably what the disciples heard. And we don't hear much about Jesus being some kind of jokester, but you got to admit, his sudden boo appearance has a certain comedic aspect to it, despite the heavy profundity of him saying, "Why do doubts arise in your heart? Look at my hands and my feet, see that it is I myself." Anybody remember that TV program called Fear Factor? I don't know if it's still on, where they tried to scare an unsuspecting individual. So let me ask, what does frighten us? And it's a question I'm almost afraid to ask, never mind think about. We don't normally like to think about what frightens us. A serious fatal illness, the loss of a job, and with that the loss of a home and everything else that we lose for lack of money. A failing marriage, or a broken relationship with a child. Yet, despite us not liking to think about what frightens us, well, there's no shortage of a market for horror movies, is it? Explain that. Maybe it's the adrenaline rush. But do we really need to be afraid of vampires, or werewolves, The Walking Dead, Jason from Friday the 13th, or even ghosts? Not really, do we? Those are a different kind of fear. And as we heard, though, apparently Jesus' disciples were afraid of ghosts. Verse 37 says, they were startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. You know, there's that TV series called Ghost Hunters. I've never watched it, but that's something on television. And on 2 occasions we saw where the disciples feared ghosts. When Jesus walked on water and at his resurrection. So apparently fear is just part of being human, is it not? Certain things, real or unreal, frighten us. Our daughter Eleanor was afraid of all things the water sprinkler when she was about 3 years old. Why? We don't really know. Seems strange. Perhaps the biggest fear, though, we face is the fear of death. The boogeyman of all boogeymen. All other fears might ultimately boil down to this one fear, death. I mentioned to the vestry this past week that I suspect one reason why religion or going to church is perhaps not as important for the younger generation is because the prospect of their death seems rather remote. Then again, fear of dying is not necessarily restricted to those who are older. One of our daughters has tachycardia, as I do. This is where the heart beats at a rapid rate. She is a young 33, and don't think when her heart jumps into hyperspace at a pulse of 140, she doesn't think she's not dying. She does. And in that respect, conversion for any of us can be a foxhole event. Not literally as on the battlefield, but very much literally when one's life seems to be threatened with death. In Jerome K. Jerome's comic novel, Three Men in a Boat, the hero consults a medical book to find out what's wrong with him. Ever done that? And he said, I came to typhoid fever, read the symptoms, discovered that I must have had it for years without knowing it. Wondering what else I had, I turned up St. Vitus's dance, V-I-T-U-S, found as I had expected that I had that too. Began to get interested in my case and determined to sift it to the bottom. And so starting alphabetically, read up on malaria and learned that I was sick with it and that the acute state would commence in about a fortnight. Bright's disease, I was relieved to find I had only in modified form, and so far as that was concerned, I might live for years. Cholera I had with severe complications. Diphtheria apparently I'd been born with. I plodded conscientiously through the 26 letters of the alphabet, and the only malady I could conclude that I did not have was housemaid's knee. Surely we can relate to the hero in Jerome's novel. Good reason not to go blind and self-diagnose. After fear of one's own death comes the fear of the death of someone we love, and neither of which, of course, we take lightly. And perhaps the next fear we all share is the fear of being near the dead. Being near the body of someone who's died usually gives most folks a creepy feeling, does it not? And that might explain in part why the disciples were frightened by Jesus' sudden appearance. Like most of us, they did not want to be near a dead person. The Mosaic law was very strict about that, which is the condition in which they last saw Jesus. And Jesus, of course, was not dead. Could such then be believed? A dead person now alive? Prove that. I recently saw a news report, you may have seen it, about an Army veteran named John Crabtree who had been receiving benefits from the government. Evidently, he had been wounded in the Vietnam War and was now on permanent disability. One day, out of the blue, he received an official notification from the government notifying him of his death. Well, needless to say, this was quite a shock to him. So Mr. Crabtree wrote the government a letter stating that he was indeed very much alive and would like to continue receiving his benefits. Well, the letter did no good. He then tried to call the government. Ever tried to call the government? The phone calls didn't change the situation either. And so finally, as a last resort, the veteran contacted a local TV station which ran a human interest story about his situation. And during the interview, the reporter asked him, well, how do you feel about this whole ordeal? The veteran chuckled and said, well, I feel a little frustrated about it. After all, have you ever tried to prove that you're alive? Scott Colglazer, in his book, Finding a Faith That Makes Sense, writes, that's a pretty good question for all of us. Could we prove that we are really alive? Really, genuinely, deep down alive? When was the last time, he asked, you had an alive moment? Not the last time you took a breath or felt your heart beat in your chest, but the last time you felt yourself alive to your living, alive to your loving, deeply present with the gift of life itself. It's worth noting how Jesus goes overboard to prove to the disciples that he is alive and not dead like some ghost. He asked them for something to eat. They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he ate it in their presence. No self-respecting ghost would eat. There are at least 3 recorded times when the resurrected Jesus eats. The Emmaus encounter, his appearance on the beach by the fire when the disciples were offshore fishing, and in the account we heard this morning. You see, the gospel writers wanted to make it quite clear that the resurrection was in fact quite real. And whether there's more to it than that may be a matter of speculation, unless we ponder that at the Eucharist, Jesus is somehow there eating with us. And of course, meals are a natural time for two or three to be gathered. And what does Jesus say about two or three being gathered together in his name? For where two or three are gathered in my name, I am there among them. You know, the usual Anglican understanding of the Eucharist or Holy Communion is that Jesus is present at the celebration of the Eucharist. The Eucharist is not a memorial, as many Protestant denominations believe, nor is it considered to be the body and blood of Jesus, the Roman Catholic Church explains through transubstantiation. But you know, ultimately, it is not so much that Jesus proved he was alive, hear this, as that he proves that we too will be alive. That we too will be alive despite having died. And in so doing, he alleviates the worst of our fears, the fear of death. Of course, living into that alleviation is not as easy as it sounds. And I've shared with you my own experience with this. Some years back when I went to the hospital for the treatment of tachycardia, I mentioned that one of my daughters has that as well, I was so frightened of the procedure that I told him that I had to leave. Nobody was making me stay there. I was just too afraid to stay for the procedure. And then Emily had me read Psalm 91, which in part says, God shall deliver you from the snare of the hunter and from the deadly pestilence. You shall not be afraid of any terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day. 1,000 shall fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. And so King David, a battle-seasoned warrior, wrote that psalm, if you think of the context of battle. You know, I don't know why, but in reading that psalm, my fear of death suddenly dissipated, which brought to my mind St. John's words, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Experiencing God's love for me through that psalm cast out my fear of death. Does this mean I no longer fear death? By no means. It does mean, however, that my fear is much less than it was. I heard about a man who was getting a haircut before going on a trip to Rome. And he mentioned the trip to his barber, who said, Rome? Why would anyone want to go there? It's crowded and dirty. You're crazy. So how are you getting there? Asked the barber. We're flying TWA, said the man. We got a great rate. The barber explained, TWA? That's a terrible airline. Their planes are old, their flight attendants are rude, and they're always late. So where are you staying in Rome? The barber asked. Well, we'll be in the downtown Hilton. That dope, said the barber, that's the worst hotel in the city. The rooms are small, the service is surly, and they're overpriced. So what you going to be doing when you get there? Well, we're going to see the Vatican, and we hope to see the Pope, said the man. That's rich, laughed the barber. You and a million other people trying to see him, he'll look the size of an ant. Boy, good luck on this lousy trip of yours. You're going to need it. Well, a month later, when the man went in for another haircut, the barber asked him about his trip. It was wonderful, explained the man. Not only were we on time, we were on TWA's brand new plane, but it was overbooked, and so they bumped us up to first class. The food and wine were wonderful, and I had a beautiful stewardess who waited on me. The hotel was great. They just finished a $25 million remodeling job, and now it's the finest hotel in the city. And they too were overbooked, so they apologized and gave us the presidential suite at no extra charge. Well, muttered the barber, I know you didn't get to see the Pope. Actually, we were quite lucky, for as we toured the Vatican, one of the Swiss guards tapped me on the shoulder and explained the Pope likes to personally meet some of the visitors. And if I'd be so kind as to step into this private room and wait, well, the Pope would personally greet me. And sure enough, 5 minutes later, the Pope walked through the door and shook my hand. And I knelt down and he spoke to me. Really? Asked the barber. What did he say to you? He said, where did you get that lousy haircut? Gotta thank Helen Johnson for this, by the way. At times, all of us have succumbed to the hyper-negative attitude of that barber. Life at times can look pretty lousy, even something to fear, especially since it seems to end with death. And in the words of the Pope of the story, life can look like a lousy haircut or worse. The resurrection, however, reminds us that ultimately our lives need not be defined by nor limited to this lifetime. We have an eternity before us because of what Jesus did for us on the cross. There's a wonderful story about Philip Brooks, who was the Episcopal Bishop of Massachusetts in the early 1890s, and among other accomplishments, authored the words to O Little Town of Bethlehem. It seems Bishop Brooks was recovering from an illness during which he denied himself to all visitors, except there was a Robert G. Ingersoll, a professed atheist, who called to see the bishop. And Brooks received Ingersoll at once. And he said, Ingersoll said, I appreciate this very much, but why do you see me when you deny yourself to your friends? Well, it's this way, said the bishop. I feel confident of seeing my friends in the next world, but this may be my last chance of seeing you. Whether we consider our lives to be a failure or mediocre or successful, eternity promised to us in the resurrection reminds us that it ain't over even when we kick the proverbial bucket. As Bishop Brooks witnessed to the atheist Robert Ingersoll. That, my friends, is not only good news, it is great news. You see, Christianity is the only faith which substantiates through the resurrection the promise and the reality of eternal life. No other faith can say that. Think about that. Trust that. And be less afraid, even afraid of dying. Because of Jesus and the resurrection, we can say boo to all our fears, frightening them away. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.